morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber for Breakfast. We're now in our 34th episode of 2023. But before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast. Today is the final day of Fiber Connect 2023 in Orlando. We have had record attendance of 4,000 attendees with 275 speakers, 94 sessions, and 275 exhibits. But to close the conference strongly today is the State Broadband Summit. The speakers include NTIA and key members of Congress, the White House, Department of Treasury, and of course, we're going to be hearing directly from a number of state broadband office directors. Just what an epic event. Speaking of epic events, our next and final regional Fiber Connect workshop will be in Minneapolis on October 24th. You're not going to want to miss that, so please register today. That brings us to today's Fiber for Breakfast session with Eric Beightel from the Permitting Council to discuss Federal Permitting Council moving broadband permitting at gigabit speeds. But before I formally introduce today's guest, I'd like to introduce Trish Ehlers from the team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you, Gary, and good morning to everyone who's joined us this morning. Before I go over a few logistical items, I'd like to once again thank the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, if you'd all keep in mind that you're all in listen mode only, to ask a question, you can type it into the question box located within your control panel on the right side of your screen. We'll host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's webinar. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours. You can find the recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. At the conclusion of the presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a very brief feedback survey. Please take a minute to do that. We really appreciate your input. I'll pass it back to Gary now to introduce our panelists and get us started. Gary?
Thanks, Trish. Good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, we had the pleasure from hearing from Dritten Nisho, the global CVO of HarrisX, who discussed their latest research on bringing a customer perspective to the home internet. So the key takeaways from this session was that fiber dominates on customer experience, no surprise, and customer satisfaction rises with speed, again, no surprise. But speed is not enough. ISPs must bundle service and/or provide an immersive in-home experience to help differentiate and ensure that their service is sticky. So some good tips from our friends. So today's on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest is Eric Beightel, the Executive Director of the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council, or called Permitting Council, to discuss Federal Permitting Council moving broadband permitting at gigabit speeds. I guess there's a lot to say here. So Eric is a nationally recognized expert in the environmental and infrastructure fields. He brings more than 20 years of experience to the Permitting Council, and Eric's extensive public and private sector experience honed his command of the National Environmental Policy Act and his capacity for solving complex environmental permitting problems on the local, state, and national level. His federal experience includes serving as a senior environmental policy advisor for the Department of Transportation and as a policy advisor at the Office of Management and Budget, where he's developed an expertise in federal permitting and a review for major infrastructure projects. Eric went on to work for WSP USA as a senior director and vice president, and HDR Inc. as an associate vice president and national lead for infrastructure policy and environmental strategy. So Eric knows what he's doing. And with that, I will turn it over to Eric. And for audience, please type in your questions to go and we'll work those into the Q&A. So let's get things going.
Great, thanks, Gary. And I hope I know what I'm doing. That was a nice intro. I appreciate that. So again, Eric Beightel, Executive Director of the Permitting Council. We tend to say Permitting Council instead of the entire title of the agency because it is such a mouthful. But we're a council of agencies that are tasked with really helping support the efficient environmental review and permitting of major infrastructure projects. And I'll tell you, joining you here on this podcast was it's an easy decision because the expansion of broadband infrastructure is really a top priority for the Permitting Council and particularly for the Biden and Harris administration. President Biden's Internet for All initiative is a whole of nation approach that's working to ensure that all Americans have access to the life-changing benefits of high-speed internet. And we've all recognized that the recent years of lockdowns and remote work and remote learning have highlighted the critical importance of broadband access for every American. High-speed internet is no longer a nice to have, but it's really an essential service that we all have to have access to in order to do our jobs and participate effectively in modern life. With the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, my office at the Office of the Executive Director of the Permitting Council now has the tools and resources that we need to really effectively support delivery of broadband across the country. But none of that work that we are going to do is possible without buy-in and full participation from stakeholders in the process, including industry leaders like the membership of the Fiber Broadband Association. So I am excited to be here today to discuss the role of the Permitting Council and how we can support broadband deployment. And we've had a busy past couple months when it comes to broadband deployment. Earlier this year, we posted the first 2 broadband projects ever to receive Fast 41 coverage, the Santa Fe Indian School Project and the Alaska Fiber Optic Project, both funded by NTIA's Tribal Broadband Connecting Program. If permitted, these 2 projects will transform the lives of underserved communities in our country, bringing life-changing benefits of high-speed internet to those who need it to complete basic tasks in today's digitally connected world. But before we go into too much of that, I do need to give you kind of a background on what the Permitting Council is and what we do. So in 2015, Congress passed the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. And in Title 41 of that act, Congress created the Permitting Council. And the Permitting Council was tasked with providing more transparency, more predictability, and more accountability to the infrastructure permitting process, and to discuss challenges amongst the member agencies, elevate those best practices, and ensure that we are deploying those best practices programmatically across government so that we are rising the level of performance across all of government as we do infrastructure permitting. We manage a portfolio of nearly 100 billion large-scale infrastructure projects, most of which are in the renewable energy, coastal restoration, and electricity transmission sectors. But we do have those 2 broadband projects, and we're hoping to have more. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the Permitting Council really is focused on providing greater predictability in the permitting process, advancing more efficient approaches to the overall permitting process, providing transparency and accountability, and really being a source of collaboration and a convener of our federal member agencies to ensure that we are working collaboratively together to advance the overall goals of the infrastructure permitting. Next slide, please. So who makes up the Permitting Council? We have 13 member agencies. So there are all of the major infrastructure agencies or agencies that are involved in infrastructure delivery, as well as representatives from the Office of Management and Budget as part of the White House and the Council on Environmental Quality, and then the Executive Director, me, who sits as chair of the Permitting Council. Next slide, please. Once we have coverage of a Fast 41 project, the benefits that we relay to those projects are multiple. We provide that increased predictability. We are requiring agencies to create a permitting timetable so that there is an expectation and an understanding of when certain milestones will be hit or when they are coming. We enhance coordination. We require regular convening meetings amongst permitting agencies and project sponsors to ensure that we are on the same page and that we are advancing the projects on schedule. We provide additional resources to agencies. Most recently, in the Inflation Reduction Act, the Permitting Council received $350 million in our Environmental Review Improvement Fund. And of that, we're providing nearly $25 million to fund our federal member agencies to support up to 60 staff that are going to be focused on broadband permitting. So we are providing resources to our member agencies to ensure that they are able to focus on the broadband permits that are coming their way and that they can manage the influx of applications that we anticipate with this unprecedented investment. We've touched on the increased transparency. We provide really focused attention on covered projects. We don't have the entire universe on the dashboard. We only have, a little under 30 projects right now. So we are able to really provide targeted support on those projects that need it and ensure that we are moving at pace. Next slide, please. And I mentioned, the predictability and the accountability, and the big tool that we have in that toolbox is the use of our federal permitting dashboard. So at permitting.gov, you can go to look at different projects that are on the dashboard. You can identify project summaries. What is the project, the current state of the project, what environmental reviews and approvals are necessary, contact information for project sponsor, as well as the lead agency for the project, as well as a listing of all the agencies that are involved. Next slide, please. But the power horse of the dashboard is really our schedules. We provide, a full Gantt-like chart. It doesn't have full dependencies that are built into it, but it provides the overall timeline for the project and all of the steps that are necessary to get through the environmental review and approval process. Each one of the approvals listed, you can click on it. It'll open up an expansive discussion of what the requirements are, a discussion of what that permit is, so that the public who is interested in understanding more about how these projects are advancing, what the requirements are that they must meet, can learn more about how to be involved, but also understand what the potential effects are and what approvals are necessary for these projects to move forward. Next slide, please. We have a number of agencies that are involved because we have a number of different sectors. We have 18 covered FAST 41 sectors, including broadband, and they cover a wide range of different types of projects. And these are all authorized in statute or added by the majority vote of the Permitting Council as being the types of projects that are going to benefit most from our targeted and hands-on support. Next slide, please. In order to become a FAST 41 project, though, you have to meet certain criteria. We have 4 different categories. The objective criteria is the one that covers most of the projects that are listed on the dashboard currently. Those projects must be subject to NEPA, a minimum investment of $200 million, and not be eligible for an abbreviated environmental review or authorization. So like under NEPA, not be eligible for a categorical exclusion or a programmatic permit. These are the types of projects that are utility scale solar fields, large transmission projects, offshore wind, things like that. Most broadband projects are not going to meet the objective criteria, not only because of the 200 million investment threshold, but also because most broadband projects are going to be deployed under either an environmental assessment or a categorical exclusion. But there are 2 other categories that are, I think, very ripe for coverage of broadband projects. First being the tribal projects. The tribal category, as long as it's subject to NEPA and it is sponsored by a tribe and located at least partially on tribal lands, we can bring FAST 41 coverage to projects. So broadband projects that are supporting tribal nations and that have tribal governments involved in their deployment are eligible for FAST 41 coverage. And that's how we brought in Santa Fe Indian School and Alaska Fiber Optic. But there is also the discretionary criteria, which allows us to identify other projects that are complex enough that would warrant the council's active involvement. Between tribal and discretionary, we believe that we can reach out to cover additional projects. Even though they may not be the most complex, we recognize the importance of broadband in overall advancement of the administration's priorities. Next slide, please. So really, one of the most powerful things about FAST 41 coverage is that project sponsors have a seat at the decision-making table. They are consulted when we are creating the permitting timetable, the schedules that I showed on a slide earlier. They are consulted on all permitting timetable modifications. So if we have to move dates out, they are consulted to ensure that they understand why those dates are moving and also be able to provide their objections to those date slippage. And then we'll have an opportunity to have some issue resolution, some dispute elevation, and work towards an amicable outcome that both the sponsor and the agencies are comfortable with. Next slide, please. So this last slide here is really about how we provide coverage to covered projects. There is an application process. We don't need to go through all of this, but essentially project sponsors would reach out to the permitting council at www.permitting.gov. There's links there to contact us. You can request initial consultation to determine whether or not FAST 41 would apply to your project, and also ask whatever other questions you might have about the FAST 41 process. I will say, before we get to the questions, although Fast 41 may not apply to a lot of individual broadband projects, we are using our role as the Center for Permitting Excellence as a critical tool in advancing best practices across government and leveraging our ability to convene agencies to look at programmatic solutions to the types of issues that broadband projects are encountering. Most of this that's occurring on roadway right-of-way is going to be fairly straightforward, and we don't have a lot of visibility into some of the state or local issues. But what we do have is the opportunity to work with our federal land management agency partners who will cover a vast majority of the Western United States, where a lot of this broadband is going to need to be deployed across BLM, Forest Service, Bureau of Reclamation, and other lands. And so where there are federal nexus and there's NEPA and complexity with landholding agencies, there is an opportunity for the Permitting Council to become engaged or at least provide some targeted technical assistance. And so we welcome outreach engagement from the listeners of this podcast to make sure that we are at least aware, and if we can provide targeted assistance, we want to make that available to folks. And with that, Gary, I'll turn it over to you for a little discussion.
All right. Well, thanks, Eric. Really interesting stuff, and critically important is anything that's going to stall our acceleration of fiber deployment is going to run up costs, and we only have so much money to spend. So let's start off with FAST 41. That's got to stand for something. Where'd you come up with that acronym? What's the 41 part?
So the 41, it was Title 41 of the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. It was basically a tag on to a surface transportation authorization in 2015. It was the most appropriate vehicle for Congress to move that piece of legislation forward.
All right. So, obviously, I hear nothing but horror stories on permitting. People that are putting in, hundreds and hundreds of miles of fiber, and they're going along a major highway, and a mile or so goes through federal land, and they get the whole project done except for that 2 miles because they can't get a federal permit or it's on tribal land. How do we be able to tie together these jurisdictions so it's more cohesive? And I assume that's kind of what you guys work in all these different agencies are doing, right?
That's exactly right. And there is not, I won't tell you that there's a silver bullet necessarily, because each agency is a little bit different, and even as they are delegated to regional jurisdictions with regional directors, there's going to be different personalities. But programmatically, what we can do is look at the needs and try to create some consistency across the agencies so that the requirements are similar when we're applying for rights of way as we go through these roadway, these national land, parks, Forest Service lands, BLM lands. Make sure that the information that we are requesting is consistent, the review, the expectations are consistent, and that's what we're working on. We're trying to make sure that we have, if not a one-stop shop, at least a predictable shop where you can go to get your permits. And I think the support that we're providing to the agencies now through the $25 million to provide staffing, but also additional tools and resources will be helpful and work towards that goal. We don't have all the answers yet, but it is something that we recognize as an issue that is emerging, and we're trying to get ahead of it.
So, I was chair of our community chamber a few years ago, and economic development was a big part of our community, and so we would do site prep, and we would do everything we can to make sure that if big employers coming in, that we already have the site all ready and ready to go, and so the community makes an investment. Is there something that the state broadband office? I mean, we got 43, almost $43 billion. So each state is going to have well over 200 million investing in broadband. They know exactly where those unserved or underserved locations are, and everybody bidding is. So can we be proactive and just say, okay, here's the areas that are eligible for BEAD funding, and they're going to, whoever is awarded the money is going to have to get these permittings. Let's just go ahead and get that out of the way. Can we do something like that?
I think there's probably opportunity for that. It's good. My favorite answer, which is always applicable in all environmental permitting questions, is it depends, because it's always context dependent. But I think The short answer is yes, because if you know the routing and that's not going to deviate, and you can identify where there are perhaps either more challenging or higher impacted resources because it's going to pass through nationally owned lands, federally owned lands, then start those conversations with those land management agencies early to let them know that this is coming so that they can prepare for it as well. I know that Federal Highway Administration requires that each state DOT have a broadband coordinator so that they can look at where transportation investments are going and coordinate dig once approaches to ensure that we are laying conduit, if not a lit fiber, at least dark fiber, where they're building out roadways to ensure that we are building that middle mile to the extent that they can. I think that's also where there are opportunities for the broadband offices and the transportation departments to communicate effectively to ensure that they know where it's needed. That's another opportunity to make sure that those plans are consistent and aligned.
So help me out with jurisdictions. So, we got state, local, federal. So you're pulling together the federal agencies, but how does that play with the others, and kind of what should we be looking out for as we go to state and local permitting as well?
We have a federal agency, we have federal statute, that is our responsibility, but we are in communication with state and local governments to the extent that we can. And some of it's proactive outreach on our part, some of it is incoming from them as they are asking for our support or at least guidance. We have been supporting the state of California on the California Middle Mile project, which is thousands of miles of broadband deployment across the entire state of California. And we actually helped to broker a deal with the federal agencies and the state agencies that are involved, a letter of intent for how they're going to coordinate and participate on that mega project together. And that's a role that we can play. We can play that role of convener where we are bringing people to the table. At the end of the day, the Permitting Council doesn't issue any permits, but we can help to provide direction and strategic advice, and also elevate issues where appropriate to help things move. So as state, local entities are working with feds, if there is a role for us to play to provide some of that convening support, technical assistance, we are happy to do that where it makes sense, for sure.
All right, so if I'm a service provider and I'm going to apply for, BEAD funding, and it's going to be over $200 million, or it's going to be in tribal, so I'm a qualified applicant for the Fast 41 program. What is it that you do for that provider? Say sign up, you're in the program, what do they get for that?
So shortly thereafter, we'll provide them with a project timetable, so that we'll list all the required federal approvals that must be completed in order for them to complete the environmental process. It'll have dates for that, so we'll have a schedule to complete that. We'll have a coordinated project plan, which will define the roles of the project sponsor and the agencies and how they will be coordinating amongst each other to ensure that we are advancing to that project. And then we will also convene regular meetings with the project sponsor as well as the agencies to monitor progress. We'll keep track of the dashboard and its milestones, and if things are coming up that look like they may slip, we'll reach out and we'll make sure we understand why or if. And if there's an opportunity for us to mitigate that schedule slippage, we'll definitely provide the support to do so. It really is it's a hands-on approach to project management from the federal government to ensure that we are moving through the process as we are supposed to.
So can you describe some of the successes that you guys had in your program so far?
Yeah, I was just in Louisiana last week for the Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion Project, not broadband, but a critical coastal restoration project that has been planned in Louisiana since the early 80s. And in 2017, the state of Louisiana came to the Permitting Council with the Army Corps. We negotiated an MOU amongst the parties. Everybody came to the table. What was going to be a 10-year process, we were able to cut almost in half. It didn't go as quickly as everybody wanted because these things are complex. There's lots of stakeholders, but it cut at least half of the timeline off of what the original estimate was. So that was a huge success. We're going to be going to a groundbreaking out in New Mexico for a SunZia transmission project, which is also, it has had a long and storied past with fits and starts here and there, but it was because the Permitting Council was able to provide that convening role to bring parties to the table. there were some changes on the sponsor side, there were some changes on the federal permitting side, but at the end of the day, we were able to see it through to completion. And we expect to see multiple records of decision on offshore wind projects in the coming months and years. So because these projects take a number of years, and because we are still a fairly young agency, we don't have a long history of success, but we are starting to see more and more because we've been at it for a little while, and now these projects are finally through the process. And what we're hoping to do is really elevate those success stories and help to explain our value add more effectively, so that people like you that ask, so what exactly do you do? We got snappy responses, and it's clear. It's easy for people to understand. Permitting is complex. It's difficult to not get really quick in the weeds when you start talking about it, but everybody knows it's hard and everybody wants it to go better. And that's what we're here to do.
So, the infrastructure is not just about broadband. We're very focused on that part, but it's water, sewer, highway. Is that something that your office can bring to the table? I see states where there's not a lot of great coordination between, these infrastructure projects. And, if you're going to get permitting for putting in more water lines or doing, smart grid upgrades and things like that, is there a way that we could leverage your office to make sure that maybe we can streamline, because someone's already doing the environmentals for one of the other infrastructure projects? And
our reach is somewhat limited in just what our statutory authority is for what we can actually provide coverage under FAST 41. But the other part of our role as a Center for Permitting Excellence, we have a much broader reach, and that's where we can elevate best practices. In general terms, we can help provide strategic advice and programmatic solutions potentially, but on a local water distribution or water system level, it's unlikely that it would achieve or meet the criteria for FAST 41, but those types of projects are similar to others that might, and so we can learn from our big projects and apply those lessons learned to smaller projects of similar scope, maybe not similar scale.
So just kind of going back to being proactive, NTI did a great job they put basically field people in every state. Well, there's about 46 NTI field people that work with the state broadband office and just help to communicate and work with anybody that's looking at applying for the money, and just help them understand the rules and programs. And so it's been fantastic. Should the state broadband office be looking? I mean, what kind of coordination are you doing with state broadband office, and should they be working with you guys so that their applicants can help facilitate this? Or
I think I don't know that there is a necessity for each state broadband office to work with the permitting councils, because I don't know that each state's going to have the type of complex projects. I mean, they're all going to have complex for their own circumstances, but we are somewhat limited in capacity as well. So we take on the biggest, most complex for the most part, because those are where you get the most bang for the buck. But working with, obviously, and I'm sure that there are, working with the state infrastructure coordinators, we work closely with the White House infrastructure implementation team. I'll be speaking with the state infrastructure coordinators. I'll be speaking with them at an upcoming meeting, letting them know about the permitting council's what our role, what we can offer them, and hopefully through those various lines of communication, if people need to reach out to us, we welcome that. I don't know that it's necessary that everybody does, but if they have questions and they want to, we're not going to turn anybody away. We'll happily take the call, and we'll have the meeting, and we'll discuss where or how we can help.
So tribal, we have a new tribal broadband working group at Fiber Broadband Association, and we already have now 22 tribes as members here in the last couple of months, and that's growing very quickly. So given that you don't have the $200 million kind of hurdle for the tribes, is there any reason why every tribe should not be working with you guys, sign up for these projects with their infrastructure money?
If they feel the need, if they anticipate it being a complex permitting process, because some of these are straightforward, and we don't need to be involved. It's a fairly straightforward project. But if they anticipate there being challenges with multiple federal agencies as they go through that? Absolutely. And we have done a number of consultations and outreach meetings with tribes to make them aware of this opportunity. And we've had really good feedback so far.
Fantastic. And so, we spent a lot of time with the House Energy and Commerce Committee. They have a lot of legislation teed up. Is there anything in particular that you guys really think needs to get through? Any legislation you're looking at or reforms that you think are going to be critical?
I will defer to my counterparts in the White House on how they want to message those reforms. They're the ones in those negotiations. I will say, I think we all recognize that there's work to be done to improve the process. We just have to be careful that in trying to accelerate, we are not reducing or minimizing the important protections that our environmental statutes provide. And I think if we can thread that needle, we'll be in good shape.
All right. So last question is, so while this $200 million minimum for Fast 41 coverage, how, if you can't meet that minimum, how can the Permitting Council help these projects under that receive, the benefit of coverage?
That will be somewhat context specific again. Unfortunately, I think I would encourage folks just to reach out and let us talk through what the project is and where the opportunities may be. It may not be Fast 41 coverage, but there may be we may be able to provide resources or tools that would be helpful to them. Templates, other tools that may help them kind of shape their project plan in a way that will advance success.
Well, fantastic, Eric. We just really appreciate the work that you're doing to bring these agencies together and to really streamline and accelerate the permitting process. This permitting has the potential to be a huge issue and could impact the timing and cost of getting fiber to every American. So your work could not be more important to our industry. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I look forward to getting back together next Wednesday for Fiber Breakfast. We're going to be speaking with Nasta Tarek, the Sustainability Director at Hawaiian Tel, to discuss fiber is key to ambitious climate action plans. Given the recent events in Hawaii, the importance of this discussion couldn't be more timely. So we're not going to want to miss that. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for having me on.